Champions Cup final for 2023-2024, folks. Two of Europe's powerhouse sides, Leinster and Toulouse, going at it from the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London. We'll go through the lineups, some stats, predictions, and you guys can let us know your thoughts on how this one is going to go. But if you had asked anybody who are two of your favourites for the Champions Cup this year, many people would have picked these two sides, and the fact that these guys are going at it in a final is pretty fitting. But yeah, it's a real flip of a coin to see which way it's going to go. Traditionally, in recent times, Leinster has had Toulouse's number. The last time they played was 41-22 in this competition last year. The time before that was the year before. It was 40 points to 17. So Leinster has tended to do pretty well against Toulouse, and their bogey side has been La Rochelle. But Leinster knocked out La Rochelle this year, so one could argue that's all been flipped on its head. Maybe Toulouse will reverse things in terms of which side gets the wood on which. But anyway, it's going to be a cracking final from London. As I said, looking forward to this one. To see these two, I mean, heaps of international guys in these squads as well, to see how they go. For Leinster's squad, it's pretty same as the one that ran out in the semi-final a couple of weeks ago, which makes sense. Both these sides have been rotated in their domestic comps, so a few of those guys got rested. In the URC out of the top 14 prior to this game. The only changes to the Leinster side are Hugo Keenan's back at fullback, which is a great bit of news. Remember, he missed out on the semi-final. Frawley was at fullback for that one, so Keenan is back. He did play in the URC the other week, so he should have a little additional bit of kind of match sharpness. And Will Connors at 7 gets the nod ahead of Josh van der Fleer. Van der Fleer does drop to the bench for this one. Will Connors with that kind of aggressive chop tackle can only be the reason that he makes the squad ahead of Van der Fleer. Van der Fleer, certainly one of the highest work rate guys in World Rugby. He didn't get World Player of the Year a couple of years ago by accident, but Connor's tackling is certainly something that gives him that bit of unique X factor. Jenkins is also up from the bench to start in the second row, and James Ryan is into the 23 on the bench, but everywhere else is pretty stable. There's a big billing on the Battle of the Nine, so Gibson Park up against Dupont. Gibson Park has been in phenomenal form. His ability to get that quick recycle ball for both Leinster and Ireland has been pretty special. And you would say there's a lot of pressure on Ross Byrne at 10. Like, he doesn't have the same pedigree as Romain Ntamack. Ross Byrne has cracking games from time to time, but then other times he has a few head scratches. So in a team which is full of world-class players, sometimes he gets a bit of extra pressure put on him. Certainly, this is his chance in a Champions Cup final to show what he can do, especially with Johnny Sexton having retired. Gets the chance to kind of step out from that shadow. But yeah, certainly a lot of pressure on him. It's an all-Irish international front row, so they'll be looking to get as much dominance as they can at scrum time, but they're up against an all-international French front row, so that may be kind of cancelling each other out. And then Caelan Doris is going to need to lead from the front. He's certainly one of the world's kind of best all-round back rowers. Like, he's genuinely got a class defensive and offensive game. And he captains the side from number 8. For Toulouse, I should say, Leinster have gone for a 6-2 split as well. So Josh van der Fleer is in the 23 jersey, and Frawley, being that kind of utility guy who can cover half the back line, gives Leinster that freedom to just name the two back line players. For Toulouse, their starting 15 is exactly the same as the one that beat Harlequins in their semi-final. As I mentioned, all international French front row with Baye Malvaca and Altaguiri. And then the second row is big and talented with Flamont and Meafu. So, I don't know, scrum time is going to be an important one. If you guys have watched the Challenge Cup final, you would have seen scrum time was maybe one of the most decisive factors of that game. But looking at this on paper, they may cancel each other out, but yeah, scrum time is going to be very important. And the French back row, the Toulouse back row is just as good as the Leinster one, man. There's so many areas where you look at this and go, these guys just cancel each other out. Kroos is one of the best defensive back rowers in World Rugby, and Willis has added the kind of punch that you get from that the Leinster guys get from Doris as well. Dupont, like I mentioned, he's going to captain the side, so his battle up against Gibson Park is going to be one to watch. Different player from Gibson Park. Dupont does a bit more kind of individual brilliant stuff. You know, he leads the way. We'll get some of his stats, but in terms of like runs and carries are the same thing, Mark. But runs and defenders beaten and whatnot, he's certainly right up there. And then the back three of Malia, Lebel, and Kinghorn is also pretty electric. So, yeah, they've gone with the three backs on the bench with Ramos, Chocobares, and Grau. But, yeah, both these sides chock full of absolute talent. Two of the best sides in the world. Stats-wise, it's interesting to see which areas each side highly kind of dominates the other, at least from like if we're looking at the round of 16, the quarterfinals, and the semi-finals. Like, how did these teams play? Leinster pass it a lot more than Toulouse. Like, they have similar amounts of possession. They have similar amounts of carries. Like, carries is 115 on average for Leinster, 114 on average for Toulouse. Virtually nothing in it. But passes is 171 to 133. So Leinster like to shift the ball around through the hands a lot more. Toulouse arguably play a little bit more direct, but they also offload a lot more than Leinster. Leinster offload 9 times a game, Toulouse more like 14. And a lot of that comes from Dupont. He's the top offloader. Tackling percentage, both sides are at 85%. The Leinster lineout has not quite been as sharp as the Toulouse one over the last 3 Champions Cup games, 88% to 94%. But those are both pretty good numbers. Neither of those is particularly poor. But both sides' goal kicking from tee has been pretty average. Neither side tops 70% across these last 3 Champions Cup games. Leinster, as I mentioned, they pass a lot more. They also kick a lot more, kicking more than 30 times a game. Toulouse are just under 20, so kind of big difference in the way these sides play. Individuals, I mentioned Antoine Dupont. Offloads, he's the top guy for offloads for those last 3 Champions Cup games out of everybody. He's offloaded 8. I think the next guy was Peter Aki with 5. So, yeah, offloads are a big part of Dupont's game. He's also the second top guy for defenders beaten, I think behind Jack Willis, and he's the top back, certainly. So, Dupont, he's going to beat you in multiple ways. It's just what he does, and he's the top guy for carries. Francois Course, I mentioned him as well. Across those last 3 Champions Cup games between these two teams head-to-head, nobody's made more tackles than Francois Course. He's made 42 tackles in 3 games, which is a heck of a shift, and he's only missed 3. Jack Willis has beaten 12 defenders, like I mentioned, so he gets that big ball carries that you don't really get from Course. They're very different players, but both bring their kind of unique aspects to the game. Gibson Park, though I mentioned, certainly one of the best players in the world in his position in particular. He's made 4 tries in the last 3 games, although 3 of them were against Leicester. And he's also had 133 metres, which is first among the Leinster players across these last 3 Champions Cup games. James Lowe with that big boot of his, plus he's set up 3 tries, is going to be a key cog, and he's also he's had 5 clean breaks in those last 3 games, which is only behind Lebel in terms of these two teams. And also Doris, like I mentioned, he's Leinster's top tackler across those last 3 Champions Cup games, and certainly gets a lot more defenders beaten than like the equivalent guy, which is Course. So, yeah, Course is more of a defensive specialty, whereas Doris, like I mentioned, gets a bit of everything going. But Doris has also had the most penalties conceded amongst these two teams across these last games. If you are in the States and wanting to watch the Champions Cup final, or go back and watch the Challenge Cup final, you want to watch some Super Rugby or URC, Top 14, Flow Rugby is the place to be. I'll put a link down there in the description. Predictions-wise, the favourites for this one is nobody. I mean, depending on which bookie you look at, they've got either team by about half a point. So this one is predicted to go absolutely down to the wire. The Rugby Forecast algorithm does have Leinster as favourites by 4 points. So not much in it. This game predicted to certainly go either way. It's an afternoon game, which sucks for me because it's going to be at about 1:45 in the morning. But I will either get up to watch it or stay up to watch it. Hopefully it's an entertaining game because I'll be pretty bleary-eyed. But anyway, you guys let us know your thoughts on how this one is going to go. Who are you backing to get that next star on the jersey? And I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.